I never imagined I'd be escorted off my own front porch by a lawyer in an expensive suit, but that's exactly what happened 3 months after my grandfather passed away. My name is Michael Reeves, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything my family had built over generations. When Grandpa Joe died, I was devastated. He had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Our modest farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania had been in the Reeves family for over 100 years, passed down through 4 generations. It wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch with a swing where Grandpa used to tell me stories about our ancestors, and 40 acres of land that had once been a thriving farm, but now mostly sat unused except for Grandpa's vegetable garden. I'd been living in Philadelphia, working as a high school history teacher, when I got the call about Grandpa's heart attack. By the time I made the 3-hour drive home, he was gone. The funeral was small, just me, a few of Grandpa's old friends, and surprisingly my cousin Derek, who I hadn't seen in over a decade. Derek and his mother, my Aunt Catherine, had a falling out with Grandpa years ago over some family matter no one ever fully explained to me. "Sorry about Uncle Joe," Derek said after the service, his handshake firm, but his eyes never quite meeting mine. "It's been a long time." "Thanks for coming," I replied, genuinely surprised he'd made the effort. Grandpa would have appreciated it. Derek nodded, handed me his business card. He was working for some investment firm in New York and told me to call if I needed anything. I tucked the card in my pocket and promptly forgot about it, as I dealt with the overwhelming task of sorting through Grandpa's affairs. The house was paid off decades ago, but there were still utility bills, property taxes, and the matter of Grandpa's ancient pickup truck that barely ran. I spent 2 weeks of my summer break at the farmhouse, going through old photos, sorting through clothes to donate, and trying to decide whether I should sell the place or keep it as a weekend getaway. Deep down, I couldn't imagine strangers living in our family home, sitting on that porch swing, or pulling vegetables from Grandpa's garden. I was making decent money as a teacher, enough to cover the taxes and maintenance on the old place, so I decided to keep it. I'd come out on weekends, maybe fix it up a bit. I was even thinking about trying to restore some of the farmland, just a small plot to start. Grandpa would have liked that. Then came the letter from Hamilton, Blake and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. The letter was brief, stating that there was an urgent matter regarding the property at 1487 Old Mill Road, and requesting that I contact them immediately. I called the number provided and spoke with a secretary who scheduled a meeting for the following Saturday. I expected to meet them at their office, but instead a sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway that Saturday morning. 2 men stepped out, one older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The other was younger, carrying a leather briefcase. They introduced themselves as Edward Hamilton and James Blake. "Mr. Reeves," Hamilton said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we represent Clearwater Development Corporation. I assume you've received notification about the property dispute?" "What property dispute?" I asked, genuinely confused. "This house has been in my family for generations." Hamilton and Blake exchanged glances. "According to our records," Blake said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a folder, "Joseph Reeves sold the development rights to this property to Clearwater 5 years ago with a provision that he could continue living here until his death." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. Grandpa would never sell this place, and he certainly would have told me about it." Hamilton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nevertheless, we have a signed contract. Clearwater has plans to develop this land into a residential community. Now that Mr. Reeves has passed, they're exercising their right to take possession." He handed me a document, a contract with what appeared to be Grandpa's signature at the bottom. The terms stated that Clearwater had purchased the development rights for $150,000, allowing Grandpa to remain in the house until his death, at which point full ownership would transfer to them. "This can't be right," I said, my voice rising. I'm the executor of his estate. I've been through all his paperwork. There's nothing about this. Perhaps he didn't want to worry you, Blake suggested, not unkindly. The point is, Mr. Reeves, Clearwater now owns this property. They've been quite generous in offering you 30 days to vacate rather than the standard 15. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This is my home. Hamilton sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. I understand this is upsetting, but the legal situation is quite clear. If you refuse to comply, we'll be forced to initiate eviction proceedings. You can't evict me from property I own, I insisted. According to these documents, you don't own it anymore, Hamilton replied. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, Clearwater will be breaking ground here next month. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could Grandpa have done this without telling me? It made no sense. He knew how much this place meant to me, to our whole family. I need to consult my own lawyer, I said finally. Of course, Hamilton replied smoothly, but I should warn you that contesting this will only cost you money you don't have. The contract is ironclad. As they turned to leave, Hamilton placed a business card on the porch railing. Call us when you're ready to discuss the logistics of your departure. I watched them drive away, my mind racing. Something wasn't right. Grandpa might have been in his 80s, but his mind was sharp as ever. He would never have sold our family home, especially not to developers who would tear it down and build cookie-cutter houses. I went inside and headed straight for Grandpa's study, a small room off the kitchen where he kept all his important papers. I'd already been through his desk when sorting his affairs, but now I searched more thoroughly, pulling out drawers completely, checking for false bottoms, looking behind picture frames, nothing. Then I remembered something from my childhood. Grandpa had shown me a hiding spot when I was maybe 13 or 14. Every man needs a place to keep his secrets, he'd said with a wink. He'd pulled up a floorboard beneath his desk, revealing a small compartment. At the time, it had contained nothing more than a few old coins and a faded photograph of my grandmother. I moved the desk aside and found the loose floorboard. It took some effort to pry it up. It hadn't been disturbed in years, but finally it gave way. Inside the shallow space was a manila envelope, sealed and unmarked. My hands trembling slightly, I opened it and pulled out several documents. On top was a handwritten letter addressed to me. Dear Michael, it began in Grandpa's familiar scrawl. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and something's happened to make you look for this hiding spot. I've had a feeling for some time that Derek and Catherine might try something after I'm gone. They've been pressuring me to sell the farm for years, ever since those developers started buying up land in the county. I've enclosed the original deed to the property and my will, which leaves everything to you. There's also a recording you might find useful. Trust no one until you've sorted this out. Love, Grandpa. Beneath the letter was the original deed to the property, dating back to 1923, when my great-grandfather purchased it. There was also Grandpa's will, properly notarized, leaving the farm and all his possessions to me. And at the bottom of the envelope was a small digital voice recorder. My heart pounding, I pressed play. The recording crackled to life, and I immediately recognized Grandpa's voice, though he sounded tense. April 15th, 2022, Grandpa began. Derek came by today with some fancy lawyer from New York. Said they had a great opportunity for me, that some development company wants to build a new subdivision in the area and is offering top dollar for properties like mine. I heard papers rustling. Then Grandpa continued. I told them I wasn't interested. This land stays in the family, for Michael. Derek didn't like that much, got real quiet the way he used to when he was a kid and didn't get his way. The recording stopped, then started again with a new date. May 3rd, 2022. Derek back again, this time with his mother. Catherine says I'm being selfish, that the money could help all of us. Told me I'm too old to maintain this place anyway, that Michael's got his own life in the city and doesn't care about some rundown old farm. I know that's not true. Michael's a good boy, always has been. Another pause, another date. June 10th, 2022. Something fishy's going on. Got a letter today from some development company saying they're following up on our conversation about selling the farm. Never had any conversation with them. Called the number on the letter, and they said they've been dealing with my representative, Derek. Seems my nephew's been presenting himself as my agent without my permission. Told them in no uncertain terms that the farm is not for sale and Derek doesn't speak for me. My blood boiled hearing this. How dare Derek try to sell Grandpa's farm out from under him? But the worst was yet to come. September 20th, 2022. Had a visit from a man named Edward Hamilton today. Says he represents Clearwater Development. Showed me a contract with what looks like my signature on it, selling them rights to develop the property after I'm gone. It's a forgery, plain and simple. I never signed any such thing. Hamilton didn't believe me, said they'd been dealing with my nephew, who assured them I was on board. When I told him Derek had no authority, he seemed genuinely surprised, said he'd look into it and get back to me. I paused the recording, my mind racing, so the contract they'd shown me was a forgery. Derek had somehow managed to fake Grandpa's signature and set this whole thing in motion. But why hadn't Grandpa reported this to the police? I pressed play again. September 25th, 2022, Hamilton called. Says they've invested too much in planning already, and their legal department is confident the contract will hold up in court. Threatened to sue me if I keep making false accusations. Said it would be years of legal battles that would drain my savings and might still end with me losing the farm. I don't have the money for that kind of fight, and I don't want to burden Michael with it either. Louis, the final recording was dated just 2 months before Grandpa died. January 3rd, 2023. Made some preparations today, just in case. Spoke with Frank Wilson. He was my lawyer back when I was running the farm as a business. He's mostly retired now, but he drew up a new will for me and helped me gather the original deed and other documents proving ownership. Frank says if they try to move on the property after I'm gone, Michael will need these papers and the recordings I've been making. I'm putting everything in the hiding spot I showed him years ago. Hope he remembers it. Getting tired these days. Heart's not what it used to be. Just hope I can hold on long enough to make sure Michael gets what's rightfully his. The recording ended, and I sat in stunned silence. It all made sense now. Derek's sudden appearance at the funeral, his business card, the lawyers showing up so soon after Grandpa's death. They were trying to force me out before I could discover the truth. I called Frank Wilson that afternoon. Though well into his 70s, he remembered my grandfather fondly and was outraged to hear about Clearwater's claims. Joe was sharp as a tack right to the end, Frank assured me, and he'd never sell that farm. It meant everything to him. Frank agreed to represent me and suggested I make copies of all the documents and the recording, storing the originals in a safe place. "Don't tell anyone you have these yet," he advised. "Let's see what their next move is." I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Hamilton and Blake returned. This time with a third man they introduced as Richard Parker, Clearwater's head of acquisitions. They'd also brought a sheriff's deputy, claiming they had concerns about trespassing. "Mr. Reeves," Parker began in what I'm sure he thought was a reasonable tone, "I understand this is difficult, but you're now on private property. We've been more than patient." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Sir, they've presented documentation showing they own this land. Unless you have proof otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." Hamilton smirked, clearly expecting me to break down or rage uselessly. Instead, I smiled. "Actually," I said calmly, "I do have proof." I pulled out the envelope Frank had advised me to keep ready. "This is the original deed to the property. My grandfather's properly notarized will, leaving everything to me, and a recording of my grandfather explicitly stating he never signed any contract with Clearwater." The smug expression vanished from Hamilton's face. Parker looked confused. "What recording?" he demanded. I played a short clip, the part where Grandpa specifically mentioned the forged signature and Hamilton's visit. The deputy turned to Hamilton. "Is that your voice on the recording?" Hamilton's face had gone pale. This is preposterous. That recording could be faked. The contract we have appears to be a forgery," I finished for him, "and I believe my cousin Derek Reeves was involved in creating it." "I don't know anything about any forgery," Parker said quickly, taking a step back from Hamilton and Blake. "We were presented with what appeared to be a legitimate contract." "By Edward Hamilton," I pointed out, "who, according to this recording, threatened my elderly grandfather with expensive legal action when he challenged the forged signature." The deputy was now looking at Hamilton with open suspicion. "Sir, I think we need to continue this conversation down at the station." Hamilton's composure cracked. "Now wait just a minute. This is a civil matter, not criminal. There's no need to involve fraud and forgery are criminal matters," the deputy interrupted. "And elderly abuse is something we take very seriously in this county." Blake was already backing toward their car. "I had no knowledge of any of this," he said quickly. "I only joined the firm last year." I couldn't help feeling a surge of satisfaction watching Hamilton sputter as the deputy asked him to come to the station to answer some questions. Parker was already on his phone, presumably calling Clearwater's actual legal department to warn them about the impending disaster. As they all prepared to leave, Hamilton reluctantly accompanying the deputy, Blake and Parker practically running to their car, I stood on my porch, the porch that had been in my family for generations, and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "I think you gentlemen know the way out," I said, unable to resist the parting shot. "This is private property, after all." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Frank Wilson connected me with a younger attorney specializing in property fraud, and together they built a case against both Clearwater Development and Hamilton. Derek proved more difficult to track down. He'd apparently left his New York job suddenly and was no longer at his listed address. Clearwater, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, settled quickly. Their official position was that they'd been deceived by Hamilton, who had presented them with what they believed was a legitimate contract. They agreed to formally relinquish any claim to my property and paid a substantial settlement to avoid a lawsuit. I suspected they were more concerned about negative publicity than doing the right thing, but I was happy to take their money regardless. Hamilton faced more serious consequences. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and elder exploitation. Apparently, my grandfather wasn't his only victim. Once the investigation began, several other elderly property owners came forward with similar stories, though most hadn't been lucky enough to have concrete evidence like Grandpa's recordings. As for Derek, he eventually surfaced in Miami, where he'd been trying to lie low. When confronted with the evidence, he quickly turned on Hamilton, claiming the lawyer had masterminded the whole scheme. According to Derek, Hamilton had approached him after learning about the potential development through his other clients. Derek admitted to providing samples of Grandpa's signature from old Christmas cards and family documents, but insisted he thought they were just going to pressure Grandpa into selling legitimately. I didn't believe his story for a second, but the prosecutors were more interested in Hamilton, who had apparently been running similar scams for years. Derek received a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony, 3 years probation and a hefty fine. Aunt Catherine called me, sobbing, begging for forgiveness on behalf of her son. I told her I needed time, which was the kindest response I could manage. Hamilton eventually pled guilty to avoid a trial and received a 10-year prison sentence. Blake cooperated with the investigation and managed to avoid charges, though his legal career was effectively over. With the settlement money from Clearwater, I took a year's leave of absence from teaching and moved back to the farm full-time. The old place needed work. The roof leaked in 2 places, the plumbing was ancient, and the barn was practically falling down. But with each repair, each improvement, I felt closer to Grandpa and the generations of Reeves who had worked this land before me. I started small with the farming, just 2 acres at first, growing vegetables like Grandpa had taught me. To my surprise, I discovered I had inherited his green thumb. By the second year, I'd expanded to 5 acres and started selling produce at the local farmers market. I hired a contractor to convert part of the barn into a small apartment that I could rent out through one of those vacation websites. It turned out there was a growing market for farm stay experiences, where city folks would pay good money to collect eggs, pick vegetables, and experience country life for a weekend. Between that income and my teaching salary, I'd returned to work, though only part-time. The farm was not just surviving, but thriving. One crisp October afternoon, almost 3 years after Grandpa's death, I was sitting on the porch swing when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. It was Frank Wilson, who'd officially retired after helping me resolve the Clearwater situation, but still stopped by occasionally to check on me. "Place is looking good, Michael," he said, settling his creaky bones beside me on the swing. "Joe would be proud." "Thanks, Frank. I couldn't have saved it without your help." He waved away my gratitude. Joe was a good man and a good friend. Couldn't let those vultures take what he worked his whole life for. He gazed out over the newly planted fields. "You know, he talked about you all the time, even before all this trouble started. Always said you had the soul of a farmer, even if you didn't know it yet." I smiled, thinking about how right Grandpa had been. I'd never imagined myself returning to rural Pennsylvania permanently, but now I couldn't picture being anywhere else. "I found something you might want to see," Frank said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Was going through some old files before sending them to storage and came across this." Inside was a faded photograph I'd never seen before, a black and white image of a young man standing proudly in front of the farmhouse. The house looked newer, the tree beside it much smaller than the towering oak it was now. "That's your great-grandfather," Frank explained, "the one who bought this place back in 1923. Joe gave me this copy years ago when I was helping him with some property tax issue. Thought you might like to have it." I studied the photograph, noting the family resemblance, the same jawline, the same way of standing with weight shifted slightly to one side. 4 generations of Reeves men had called this place home. Now it was my responsibility to preserve it for the next generation, should I ever have children of my own. "Thank you," I said, carefully returning the photo to its envelope. "This means a lot." As Frank drove away, I remained on the porch, watching the sun set over my fields. I thought about all that had happened, the near loss of my inheritance, the fight to reclaim it, and the unexpected joy I'd found in embracing my heritage. Grandpa had known what might happen and had prepared as best he could. He'd trusted me to find the hidden deed and recordings, to stand up for what was rightfully ours. And in doing so, he'd led me back home, to the place where I truly belonged. I closed my eyes and could almost hear his voice, telling me stories on this very swing. "Land is the only thing that lasts, Michael," he'd often said. "Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to do just that. The farm was safe now, our legacy secured. And somewhere, I knew, Grandpa was